Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. Tonight, we're talking about how to craft a lesson. Because I can tell you, as an adjunct professor at Brooklyn College, a lot of my students are scared of a couple of things. They're scared of dealing with parents, they're scared of classroom management, and they're not quite sure how to develop a lesson. So I'm really excited today to have an expert in all of those areas talking about her brand new book, Always a Lesson: Teacher Essentials for Classroom and Career Success. Her name is Gretchen Bridgers, and she is the founder and CEO of Always a Lesson consulting firm, as well as the host of Always a Lesson podcast, where I had the privilege of being Gretchen's guest. I don't know how long ago now, maybe over a couple years. And now I get to return the favor, or return the punishment, because she never told me how difficult it was to actually do a podcast. So now it's her turn on the hot seat. So Gretchen, thank you for being here today.
Hey, John, I'm excited to collaborate again, talk shop, and just reconnect because, like you said, it had been a while, but your episode is so valuable. I continue to share it out on social media.
That's great to hear, Gretchen. So Gretchen, I think it's going to be the same with this episode because, as I said, as a student teaching advisor, my students have all this angst about what it means to be a new teacher, and so much is getting thrown at them politically, socially, economic issues of their students, family issues of their students, that it really is hard to grab hold of something steady to actually say, okay, this is what I need to concentrate on to become an effective teacher. Could you tell us a little bit then, Gretchen, how teacher development became an area of interest of yours, and why particularly new teachers are you interested in giving them advice on how to teach better?
Yeah, I'm going to fill you in, starting from when I began teaching to how it all developed now, if you're okay to buckle up for this ride.
I am.
Okay, so when I first started teaching, I was super excited, elementary level, third grade. And in my third year, they threw me a student teacher. And I thought, wait a minute, I am still in the mentor program. Someone's helping me teach, and now you want me to help somebody else. But I learned in education, you just have to be a few steps ahead of somebody to be able to help them. So I started writing down every piece of advice that I thought would be helpful on index cards, and I put them in a box, and every student teacher that would come, I'd say, here, read all these great tips and advice. You're going to be the best teacher ever. And they'd spend the weekend going through the index cards and like, wow, this is so helpful. And can my friend over here have it? And I was like, man, I really don't want this index card box to get lost. It's full of nuggets. And they said, well, why don't you just put it in a Word document and I can share it? Oh, that's a great idea. So I did that, and then I was able to share, and someone said, you could just write it down in a book. And I thought, what? Never even thought about this. Don't know anything about writing a book. And I just self-published, year 5, maybe, Elementary Education 101, what they didn't teach you in college. And I thought, man, this is all the nitty-gritty that no one teaches you, right? But it's all the stuff you need to know. And I was just so proud of that and helping everybody. And so I guess without knowing it, that's kind of where it started of, oh, I can teach kids, but I could also help teach my colleagues. And so over the years, I had student teachers or any new teacher came on staff, I was helping them. I started leading professional development for the district in my school. And little by little, I was gaining traction in this whole world of helping teachers improve. And I never really knew what my shtick was. Someone said, well, why don't you be a literacy facilitator or a math facilitator? And I thought, I'm not passionate about a single subject area, but I really love helping teachers teach better. And so over the years, I didn't know it at the time, I was creating this pathway. I call it the teacher success pathway. And I talk about 4 bricks on this path. And if you work on them in sequential order, you get better faster. And it took so long for that aha to come, even though the work had been happening for years. And so I transitioned out of elementary school, coaching teachers in K-12 environments and thinking, wow, this is actually working no matter what grade you're teaching, which means great instruction is great instruction no matter, what content you're teaching. And then someone said, hey, you should probably write that down. And so I did. And that's my latest book you spoke about. And it's just helping teachers get better, which the domino effect helps students get stronger in the classroom.
I love that, Gretchen. And let's delve into that book a little bit. You mentioned 4 bricks of teaching. What are those 4 bricks, and why should we be focusing on each of those areas?
Great questions. So the bricks are as follows, starting with lesson design. And just imagine in your head, you're building a house from the foundation up. If we do not solidify our planning, then it doesn't matter all these other things we're working on, because like me in my index card box, I was just doing random things, but I was never gaining traction because I wasn't working on the right things in the right order. So once you get planning done, then you can go to classroom management, brick number 2. And then when you've got all that sorted out with your structures and your systems and your protocols, then you're ready for student engagement, because they need to engage with you and the content and their peers, but they can't do any of that if you don't have the management in place, and you don't have that if you haven't planned to have all those things in place. And finally, when you get to brick 4 on that teacher success path, you have hit student ownership, which is the best place of all. It's that self-running classroom where students are doing their thing because they have learned and earned the potential to do a self-run book club or do the announcements or take attendance or help in other ways, but also lead discussions. And it's just such a powerful way to release the reins to students. So that's the 4 bricks. And if you don't work on them in the right order, then you waste a lot of time and energy. And that's the part that I didn't realize for a long time, because I realized these 4 bricks were important, but I didn't know which one came first, or maybe there's more bricks. And it turns out these are the most foundational, that whether you're a new teacher or a seasoned teacher, you get stronger faster.
Gretchen, you're preaching to the choir, because
I know.
as a consultant myself, I can't tell you, I mean, not all the time, but occasionally I'll go into classrooms and I'll see great student engagement. Maybe they're playing a Kahoot game or doing something else. But when I delve or dig deeper, it isn't really clear what the learning objective is.
Yes.
And so while I'm happy that students are engaged and they enjoy going to school or going to that teacher's class, I always want to see that. It's not necessarily going to lead to anything in terms of their knowledge that they could take with them, because there wasn't that plan in place.
Yeah.
So to your point, a lot of folks, a lot of teachers, especially new teachers, tend to start with the student engagement you mentioned,
Yes.
but really they need to flip that around. Start with the planning. You need to have a plan. As I think probably your mentors told you, as they told me, you need to have a map in terms of where you're going with your instruction, because how do you know you've arrived if if you don't have a map? What's the expression? If you don't have a map, then anywhere is successful, or
Right.
anywhere will work, right? Well, we
Yeah.
don't want that, obviously. So I really like how you mentioned not only those 4 bricks, but the importance in doing those 4 bricks in the order you mentioned.
Right.
Lesson planning, management, because again, management will come if you have a solid instructional plan and you've planned for every minute of instruction. And then we'll get to the student engagement. Let's unpack lesson planning, because Gretchen, I've had a couple guests on. We talked about objectives, creating objectives and breaking apart standards. I've also recently had a guest, Maria Nielsen, on, and she was talking about how within a PLC you could create with your colleagues a unit in 15 days or create 15-day units. We didn't really get into the nitty-gritty, though, of what a daily lesson would look like or should look like. So
Okay.
talk to our audience a little bit about what are the components of an effective lesson.
Okay, so like you were mentioning a little bit ago, folks just want to do the fun stuff, which is pick the cute activities on Pinterest, and that's the engagement piece. We also have a thing called, hey, did you use technology? Let me give you a check in your observation. So they're just haphazardly picking things, but it's not aligned to what you're supposed to be focused on to help students learn. And then principals are thinking, well, no, let's not do engagement. Let's do classroom management, which is that brick before, because the class is a mess. Yes, we can get there, but we have to go to the foundation and plan to prevent the misbehaviors, to prevent the misunderstandings, so that when you actually get to manage, you're really not managing much. You're facilitating all that you've planned. So to start with the lesson plan, I always say, a lesson plan is different than lesson design, which is what that first brick is. Think of designing a play from start to finish. Who's coming on? Who's going off? What props are needed, which is materials in the case here of a classroom. And you have to think about all the details, and that's really overwhelming. But the good news is a lot of this is repeated in your subsequent lessons. So if you spend a good majority of the time thinking through, how do I want my classroom to feel? How do I want to operate it? Then you can just reuse, rinse and repeat some of those things. But when you're planning, it's best to come together with a collaborative group. You mentioned PLC. Have your end of unit in mind, like what is the final destination? We talked about a map and trying to get there, and planning backwards so that everything you do actually gets you to that place, rather than what I did with those index cards. Remember, is this random thing over here hoping to get there? And once you've ensured, okay, I know where I'm going, I know where I'm going to start, which is your standard. And by the way, it's a skill to take a standard and break it into how many different objectives fit under that. Some standards have 14 objectives to teach, some have 3, and plotting that on a calendar to know how many days is it going to take me to thoroughly do this, and then assess kids. And so you think, wow, you've got your end and your beginning, that's bookends, but where's the actual lesson? It's like that comes last, which sounds really counterintuitive. Teachers want to just jump into what does this lesson tomorrow look like? But if it's not aligned to what comes next and what comes next and what comes next, then you end up spending a lot of time and a lot of effort in the wrong ways. Students then are not going to be able to show achievement like they could if you synced up all your lessons to make sure they connect and are heading in the right direction. So I don't care what the plan looks like, but yes, it needs to have that standard and that objective and that assessment. And then you go through and you plan the rest of your lesson, which is the gradual release of I do what I'm doing as the teacher, what we're going to do together, the we do, and then the you do what you're independently doing. And just because you have that model doesn't mean you're done. You have to think about who is getting paired up with who to discuss. What questions are you asking? What's the ideal answer when you're asking the question to know you can move on? What's the pace of the lesson? All these details are essential so that when you get up to execute, you can actually do it and do it well. And when we are able to really manage how we're executing a lesson, that's where we put out a lot of the fires that teachers are reporting. I can't teach because this is happening and this is happening. Did you plan to prevent that? No. Well, let me see your plans. And it's just a one piece of paper and it's page 12, or they wrote it 3 weeks ago because they have to send it to administrators to check it off. And you're thinking we have to design a learning experience, not just put stuff on a piece of paper.
Gretchen, I'm going to challenge you a little bit.
Okay.
And I'm gonna ask you some questions that sometimes I get asked by teachers.
Uh-oh. Go ahead.
So we'll see how you answer them.
Okay.
Question number 1. Do I really need a lesson design or a lesson plan? I have a textbook.
Yeah, because the thing is, kids are in front of you that are different this period, the next period, or next year, and whatever. And you have to personalize what's in the textbook, pull out what's aligned, because not everything that the textbook developer has put in this book is aligned. And a lot of times there's gaps. So this is why you have to plan ahead of the night before. So you're looking at what resources do I have available to me, and what else do I need to pull, supplemental things to make to fill in these holes. And then I need my team to help me think of really engaging ways to bring this to life. So a textbook is not a blueprint. It's just ideas for different ways and things to share, but is not the end all be all. And no curriculum is. There's not a magic curriculum.
What resonated with what you said is the textbook publisher does not know your kids. And it's actually a line I often use with those that I coach and the way I answer that question. So I'm glad we're on the same page with that question.
High five.
Woo. Along those lines too, they don't necessarily know the cultural backgrounds of your students or the background knowledge your students have. So who knows if the texts that they're using, the examples they're using, if those are examples that students can, identify with. And we talk a little bit about engagement being part of an effective lesson design. Obviously, the more that students can tap into their background knowledge and their cultural knowledge, the better. And sometimes textbooks can do that. I think they're getting a little bit better doing that than when, say, you and I were in school, but still. To your point, the teacher is the one with the knowledge about those students.
Right.
So let me throw another question out at you.
All right, what you got?
Asked. Gretchen, I myself wrote this curriculum, so I don't need to lesson plan.
Yeah, but you don't understand, as students progress in their learning, you're going to need to pause, repeat, do multiple examples. You might need to press forward with kids who are ready to add on and extend their learning. So yes, you designed this to the middle kid, to the kid who just kind of plugs along at normal pace, but you're going to have kids with different needs and you're going to need to make adjustments. Plus, a fire drill might randomly happen and now you're a day behind, or you were sick and the sub didn't teach it well. So you have to allow time to personalize, like we just said, but also understand where your students are, even if it's not the ideal plan. And so, yes, a pacing guide, or you wrote the curriculum, kind of lays it all out there. You still have to take the time every year. You've got different kids in front of you to make sure this is reflective of who's in this room at this point, where they left off the day before, what support they might need today. And again, align it to where we're going, because you might have put something in the curriculum that you thought was relevant, and maybe you and your team through discussion realized it's not quite aligned and we need to make room for reteach. So we're going to pull this and hold it for later. And so you have to adjust, and that's part of a teacher, is being able to think on your feet and make adjustments.
Now, we're talking about lesson design, and you talked about having that end goal in mind, which is students meeting that learning objective for the day.
Right.
And that learning objective coming from the standard. But again, to your point, a standard does need to be broken down because it could have many components.
Yep.
So in a particular, if we're talking about lesson design, we really should be focusing on, say, one part of that standard or one learning objective of that standard.
Yep.
And then how would you recommend teachers build in assessment so they know that their students know it and or can do it without just waiting for the end of unit test or the end of year state assessment? How in lesson design, Gretchen, do you build in assessment?
Great question, because when I was teaching, I thought assessment was a piece of paper and it happened at the end of a unit, or maybe it was a Scantron sheet from the state. I didn't realize assessment could be so many different things. And I'll give you this analogy. You don't want to be on a walk with this red wagon full of stuffed animals, walking one block with your face forward the entire time, to get to the end of the block, turn around, and guess what? There's no stuffed animals in that wagon anymore. Now you got to go all the way back. You have no idea why they fell out, where they fell out exactly. And so you're scrambling to get everything back together, but you don't have any data points that give you information on why this actually happened. Instead, when you're walking that wagon, you need to constantly turn your head. Is everyone with me? Are we good? Can I move forward? Can I go faster? Do I need to slow down? Do I need to go back because someone fell off the wagon? I got to get you back in. And you do that through checks for understanding and knowing, are you with me? And how well do you know and understand what I'm asking you to do already? Some lessons you may not even get to independent practice because the kids need a lot of hand holding. They need lots of examples. They're not ready to push through. And that's why you have to be really thoughtful when you're planning of, if they don't get it, what am I going to do? And if they do get it, what am I going to do to add on to this lesson? And so I say all this to say, you have to, throughout that design process, put little stops, little checks for understanding, a little stoplight that says, hey, turn around and check the wagon. Is everyone still with you? And there's a difference between interaction and engagement. I don't want, do you get it? Thumbs up, thumbs down, shake your head, yes or no. I need proof with your language you're using, something that you're writing, what you're producing. I need to see evidence how well you are on the right track. And that takes a lot of fine tuning to figure out how to do that. So informal assessment is probably my favorite because it's in the moment. You can have a student roster in front of you. You're walking around, you're leaning and listening, you're looking at work samples, and maybe it's just a plus, like they're with me, or it's a minus, like, hold on, I might need to pull this student for a small group or a one-on-one to just reteach. Or think of your own note-taking system, but you can get around the classroom really fast when you know, what am I looking for? So just before I was saying, what's the question you're going to ask and what's the ideal answer? Instead of letting one student answer, I need to see everybody answer, maybe on whiteboards or on a piece of paper or through discussion. So I know, okay, I'm going for 80% and then we're moving on. And so, but that you can't just randomly do that if you haven't planned to do that. And where exactly are you going to do it? And that all comes back to designing this learning experience.
Have you been in any of my student teachers' classrooms? Because it sounds like you have. I can't tell you, Gretchen, how many times I've suggested, and I will be continuing to suggest to my student teachers, because it takes time to build a habit, bad habit and a good habit.
Right.
No more thumbs up.
Yeah.
No more. Do you have that? Do you got that?
Any questions?
Any questions? Because adults, we do that as adults to each other.
Yeah.
And if adults don't even feel comfortable saying, yeah, I have a question, do we really think our middle school students or elementary school students are going to have the maturity to say, I mean, some actually do, to say,
it's rare. Yeah.
Exactly. Ms. Bridgers, I'm not quite getting that. Could you go over that again? It's rare.
Yeah.
It is really, really rare. I'm glad you mentioned the teacher needing to take the pulse, check the pulse.
Yes.
And check that pulse of everyone in a classroom, not just one student at a time, not just the ping pong. I'm also, Gretchen, I don't know if you've used it in your lessons. I'm a big fan of turn and talk, just a very quick turn and talk, and then ask the question, turn and talk, and then maybe cold call or popcorn a student to respond.
Yeah, you need to know that the majority is with you before you keep going. And technology is a good time for this assessment. So there's many tools you can use where you can poll students and they can submit answers, and then very quickly you're getting around the room. So there is a time and place for technology, as long as it's aligned, doing something you can't physically do to enhance the lesson, then yes, I approve it. But we've got to get away from that interaction, which is very low level engagement. We really need to allow all students to use the vocabulary, talk about the content in multiple ways, to know that they're not just regurgitating something you said, like Simon says, but they actually can paraphrase it, use their own words to explain it to a peer. And all that lets you know we're ready to move on.
Gretchen, your other major brick number 2, is classroom management. And I know that your background is in psychology. So let's talk about classroom management a little bit. Let's just say a teacher's dealing with the behavior. How should teachers address those basic, quote unquote, misbehaviors that we know that we're going to see? And what are some typical misbehaviors you might see in an elementary school, in a middle school, in a high school? And drawing upon your background in psychology, what do you recommend, particularly for new teachers, what do you recommend they do so they're helping to mitigate those misbehaviors and not aggravate those misbehaviors?
There's a lot to unpack there. I would say understanding the procedures you want in place, outlining the expectations of how to learn in the classroom helps prevent some of those misbehaviors, because psychology tells us kids are, when they're bored, they're going to make up their own thing to do, which means your lesson the time wasn't tight enough that they had extra time to just mess around. Or maybe you didn't have all your papers organized and that gave them a little downtime and now they're chatting, or playing trash get ball with, random pieces of trash they found. And you're thinking to yourself, gosh, why are they always misbehaving? And it's like, let's go back to your plan. Like, what did this transition was it supposed to look like? And it's like, I didn't really think about it. I just knew we had to go from this to this. Well, you have to think, which route are students going to be taking? And maybe I don't want John walking by Dan, because then they start high-fiving and doing whatever else. So you need to create the route that you want kids to transition, to get materials, to get to different centers and whatnot. And so it takes that thoughtful planning. And in elementary school, kids, if they're bored, they're going to act up, or if they're confused and frustrated, then they give up and they have to do something to stay entertained. And so that's where a lot of the misbehaviors come from. But another thing to think about is misunderstanding, when they're truly just confused because you know what you mean, but you didn't really practice that in the mirror maybe, or you didn't share it in 2 or 3 different ways. And so the kids are like, I just don't even know. So in this turn and talk over here, we're just going to talk about sports, and it doesn't matter because she wants us to talk for 30 seconds and we'll look like we're engaged, and then we're moving on. So at the elementary building, it's lots of just talking and distraction, but they're not doing it like out of malice. It's just there's some gray areas there that you haven't thought through, and it could have been prevented. Have you thought through the protocol you have in place? Now, when you get to middle school, then you've got people are too close, or students walking down the aisle and they're scooting their desk. So now the kid has to go way around them, and then they're giggling and they're telling jokes. And it just becomes like this popularity thing of who's the funniest, who's the class clown. And then you've got multiple languages happening in your classroom at that point. And now you're trying to mitigate what are they all saying to each other. And then you get to high school and they're sleeping and they're on their cell phones and they could care
Apathy.
less. And so it depends what your fires, I'm going to call them, are, but you know your kids because you're the leader in that classroom. And you also maybe have access to colleagues who have taught this grade before and can tell you, here are common misbehaviors that you need to think through when you're designing this lesson so they don't occur. And then you set up protocols in place. This is how we turn in papers. This is how we get materials. This is how we transition. This is how I want you to respond. This is how long you have. This is the noise volume during this activity. When you get that detailed for what it is you want and you share that expectation, and then you hold students accountable to meeting that expectation, that's when you spend more time learning than putting out the fires. And that's the momentum, because you can't get to that brick 4 where it's like the kids are running the room and they're all just super smart and engaged, because you haven't set the tone for them to be successful. And so you're basically giving boundaries of, this is how we learn in this classroom. This is how you're going to be successful. And I'm going to make sure that you follow this to a T.
And one thing I'm hoping that our listeners are picking up on this, at no point yet have we talked about math, science,
Right.
English. So yes, you might be, especially by the time we get to middle school and high school, yes, you might be a social studies teacher, but you're a whole child teacher. A lot of times, Gretchen, in my work with student teachers, it is reminding them, although elementary, because most of my student teachers are elementary teachers, so they get this, I think, a little bit more than high school teachers. You're teaching the child. Yes, you have a subject area. Yes, you're teaching a math lesson, or yes, you're teaching an English lesson, but ultimately you're teaching the child. So if it does take you longer to go over your expectations,
Right.
the deliverables, if
Mhm.
you're taking more time asking students to repeat what the directions are, that's okay, because they're not going to get through the curriculum anyway if they're goofing around. And you are also responsible for their social emotional learning. Again, I find elementary school teachers find that an easier lesson or an easier lesson about teaching. That is a little bit harder of a pill for high school folks to swallow. But
Well, I can tell you why. It's
please.
that psychology again. When you're in elementary, you're in the mode of, I'm helping this child develop because they're young. When you get middle school and high school, you're kind of like, you're grown. You should know better. Like, you know this already kind of thing. And so you're less apathetic for, okay, their brains are still developing and maybe they don't have the best habits. And so I have to help them develop that. But a lot of times you're thinking to yourself, okay, it's all about content. You've figured out how to learn and how to manage your time by now. Like, I don't need to help you learn how to learn. And unfortunately, it's not true. Elementary, yes, it's a lot of that, but it's still true in high school.
So, Gretchen, what have we not discussed about lesson design or about becoming an effective teacher right from the start? What pearls of wisdom can you give the audience members listening to this podcast episode?
Well, I want to just encourage you, no matter how many years you've been teaching, that you always go back and reset. So when you get a new class and you're starting a brand new year, you go back to brick one. Even if you've been teaching 20 years and, like you said, you wrote the curriculum, you know it in and out, we always reset, go back and work your way through, because your students are the ones that you are doing this for. And there were some years I hung out in brick 2 classroom management until May because they just weren't getting it. And then there's other classes where they were moving right along through the bricks. And I thought, man, this is easy. Thinking it's all about allowing the process to do its thing and to not think your success as a teacher is tied to which level you're on. It's not like, oh, you're a bad teacher, you're level 1 or brick 1. That's not how it works. It's responsive to who is in front of you at that time. And middle school and high school teachers, when you have different crews of kids coming in each period, you might be in brick 3 with one group and brick 1 with another group. It's all about where are you and where are they and how are you yinging and yanging, but you have to keep the sequence in mind if you really want to see the greatest success.
Have you ever heard, Gretchen, the expression, you could teach your first year 20 times?
Yes,
or 20 years?
Right. It's so true.
I mean, and it relates directly to what we're talking about here, right?
Yep.
Yeah, you have that curriculum. And yeah, you might have that curriculum for 5-6 years. But to your point, Gretchen, every year you need to hit that reset button because those particular students are different than the ones you had before. And they're going to be the ones that are coming in after are going to be different than the ones you have now.
Yeah, and maybe the curriculum changes, which we know happens a lot, or maybe administrative changes in the way they want to see instruction or things they want from you. So there's always these factors, external factors that you have to take into consideration when you start the journey on the teacher success path, and not take it personal. If you're staying in one brick for a while, it means there's work to do with this class, not you as a person and your value. You could still be teacher of the year and be stuck in a certain brick. It's just all about responding to the people in front of you and doing what's best for them, because as they go through the bricks, they're getting more responsible and they are taking on more ownership and gaining autonomy because they've earned it. And so it's a growth process for them.
Exactly. And I'm really glad that you, in a sense, gave permission to those educators listening to this podcast. I'm definitely going to recommend it to my student teachers, that it's not, you haven't failed if you're not on brick 4.
Right.
That it's about the needs of your student. And that is the mark of a responsive educator. And ultimately, that is where we want to go. We want to be responsive to our needs of our students.
Amen. You said it good.
Gretchen, where can people find out more about you and your podcast and the amazing work you do?
You can find me at alwaysalesson.com. There's the blog, the podcast, courses if you want them, downloadable printables, access to the book right here. And we even have chapter by chapter study guides. Social accounts are all on the top of that. So that's kind of my home base, and you can do what you need to do so that you improve in the areas that you need to.
Thank you so much, Gretchen, for your time today. This has been informative. And I hope, particularly new teachers, but really all teachers, I hope they do pick up Always a Lesson and take some of the advice that you gave us so graciously today. So thank you.
I appreciate it, John. This was fun.
Likewise. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.